Have you ever thought to yourself, I know I'm smart, I know I'm intelligent, why do I feel so dumb trying to learn a language? Now, this is a very common sentiment that I get from language learners, both in my personal life and with the language learners that I coach. What I'm going to say to that is challenge it a little bit and ask yourself, who are you trying to prove yourself to? I promise language learning indeed does get so much easier, so much more enjoyable and sustainable whenever you decide that you are done trying to prove yourself. If you have seen my polyglot video that I made probably like 3 or 4 years ago, I looked like I was probably enjoying myself in that video, but it was horrible. Absolutely horrible to make, because the entire time I was trying to prove myself. I was trying to prove my worth and intelligence to be considered inside the YouTube language learning space as a worthy language learner. And when I stopped trying to prove my worth or my intelligence to people or to other people's expectations that I perceived they had, that is when language learning, it felt safe for me to approach instead of feeling like a constant source in my life of anxiety and frustration. I had so much joy and curiosity to learn something new, and it was just totally destroyed by wanting to prove myself. So how do we actually bridge that gap from wanting to prove ourselves to others and transitioning to learning at our own pace, at our own rhythm, in our own way? First, let's break down the very first thing that I talked to you about, which was, I know I'm intelligent, but I feel dumb learning this language. Let's differentiate first between what confidence is and what self-esteem is. Usually we can conflate the two, and then it can sometimes manifest in us telling ourselves and experiencing a really big juxtaposition of, I'm smart, but also this thing is making me feel dumb. Self-esteem is knowing that you're smart, knowing that you are capable. If we know that we have a lot of self-esteem, we might think, why am I not confident, right? Why do I sound dumb? When actually, there are two separate things that we need to start to work on internally as language learners, as part of our mindset work, alongside all of the logistical, organizational planning, making routines, etc. Curiosity is such a powerful anecdote to when we feel like our language learning is just a heavy lift at the moment. And the best way to start unlocking curiosity for yourself is to start asking more questions. Whenever we find ourselves in a really critical, negative headspace. So for example, if I feel a lot of anxiety, and I have been for a while, about trying to speak with a native speaker in person for the first time in Italian, I might tell myself, I am not capable. Instead, we can turn those doubts that we have, which are understandable, into questions of, why exactly am I feeling this anxiety? How can I pinpoint what is making me feel anxious, and how can I meet myself where I am at right now so that I can still work towards speaking, but maybe not go immediately to a native speaker and then feel that intense anxiety and then immediately retreat, then in turn complete the self-fulfilling prophecy of not being able to speak. You are perfectly capable of speaking Italian in this situation, but the actions that you're taking are aligning with your limiting beliefs. When you start getting into the habit of doing the mindset work and replacing more of those self-critical, judgmental as well, statements about your own capabilities, those questions that come from a genuine place of curiosity can start to open you up to how feeling neutral about your language learning can feel, feeling non-judgmental, feeling non-shameful about where you are at. A lot of this curbs black and white thinking, right? Which is where most of those really judgmental answers that we tell ourselves, those judgmental limiting beliefs, come from. I do have a 5-minute mindful fluency reset, a really short workbook that I made just for you in case you are struggling with some of these thoughts that make you spiral, and it is for free down in the pinned comment below if you'd like to grab it. How else can we start to stop trying to prove ourselves? It lies also in celebrating the human you are behind your languages. You are truly a whole person behind what you are doing, and language learning is a complement to your life, to your personality, to your energy and how you show up in the world. one of the hardest things to do is accept ourselves in all of our seasons. Language learning is no different. Yes, we can have the perfect plan, we can have the best resources or the best teachers. But if we are not accepting ourselves and accepting the fact that we can't show up with our best looking the same as it does every day, we can't show up with the same energy consistently, we can't show up with the same, sometimes fluency even. But when you accept your humanness, when you accept and, as I said before in the other point, get curious about how you get to show up differently in your language that is incomparable to how anyone else shows up in their language, that is when you start focusing less on what you lack and what you're frustrated by, and more on what actually lights you up to do in your language and what do you appreciate about how you learn specifically. That is when you start to really understand what starts to work for you, because you're more willing to experiment outside of just copying someone else's routine. That's a lot of black and white thinking. That's a lot of limiting belief statements, right, that we just talked about, that can really take up a lot of our mental energy and take away that curiosity. But again, it's a ripple effect. When you start approaching from more curiosity and you start to understand and appreciate how you specifically learn, then you care way much more about that than what someone else's expectations are telling you to do, or how you should be, how you should learn your language. And ultimately, all of this frees you up to set your own expectations for yourself instead of relying on other people to prove yourself to. And that is freedom, to literally do completely what you want without shame and guilt. That is such an important component of long-term language success. Another thing I want to reassure you on, if you have been sitting through this video and thinking about this concept of, I know that I shouldn't need to prove myself to anyone, but I still have what feels like a need to do so. I want to reiterate that you do not owe absolutely anyone else their version of what they think fluency is. Fluency itself is pretty subjective, right? I mean, we can all agree that fluency is not starting as a beginner, right? But a lot of people are going to have different definitions of what fluency is. It is a word that is just as, I would argue, subjective and broad as what being a polyglot is. And so often too, when we feel like we have been consuming a lot of information online and seeing everyone's highlight reels, and you're just sitting there and you're like, I feel so behind. Having so much attention focused on that usually also means that you're pressuring yourself to measure up to someone else's version of fluency or their highlight reel when you don't even know what your own definition of fluency can look like. And maybe you didn't even know that you had freedom to actually choose that. I remember when someone in my life was unsure about if I was actually fluent in all of my languages that I was studying in front of them, because they claimed that I did not have a C2 certificate in this and that language. And it made me feel genuinely bad about myself, even though before, if they had never mentioned that to me, I wouldn't have felt bad at all. I would have just kept on studying and kept on enjoying the process, which would have kept me going towards consistency to then get to my goals. And it was really where I had to learn to define where I felt good in my own capabilities, to then set my own standards and expectations for myself and stand firm in those expectations, that other people's opinions about what I was doing didn't influence me anymore. And now I'm just saying, like, a comfortable B2 is my definition of where I feel comfortable enough to just get around in the language as I please. Your language is intended for your life, your brain, your energy, and you are certainly the most important person that matters in your language learning anyways. Otherwise, what are you doing this all for? This is a vehicle for you to learn how to express yourself differently. And truly, the only person that you need to prove yourself to is yourself. I know it's easier said than done. So if you are looking for really accelerating your results towards having that lifelong confidence that you want, I also coach language learners one-on-one. So if you are interested in potentially seeing if we're in a good fit, then book your free discovery call down below in the pinned comment. Other than that, make sure to like and subscribe to this video if this is your first time running into me on YouTube, and I hope I will see you in another video very soon.